Good day, everyone. Welcome back to Digital Ag Global for our latest episode, your go-to podcast for everything ag tech and digital ag. Today, we're exploring a topic that sits at the intersection of agriculture, finance, and international trade. Across many agricultural markets, one of the biggest constraints isn't productive capacity or market demand, it's access to capital. Farmers, aggregators, and traders often struggle to secure the financing needed to move commodities from local supply to global markets. And I see this discussion coming up a lot in people from people involved in the agricultural sector in Africa. And many people are saying that it is the limiting factor on agricultural development in the continent. As always, my co-host today is Yuri Kovalchuk, CEO at Cultivate. Yuri, your thoughts?
Thank you, Clyde. Hi,
Oh, I
guys. My
think we
name is
need some mic
Shuri.
from you there, Yuri.
Can you hear me now? Great. Guys, as usual, Yuri, CEO at Cultivate. We are AgTech, software development company, and today we're gonna have a great discussion around how to manage one of the biggest challenges in agri-food value chain, but specifically in ag commodities trade or international trade. It's lack of access to structured finance. And today we're going to look into this through the prism of Farmties, company that started as AgTech, but saw a bigger challenge, a bigger opportunity in finance world, and how this implications of finance availability uh, make impact on a AgTech globally, but also in Africa and throughout the continent. Before we jump into introducing Dara, I just want to mention that if you guys want to become a part of Digital Ag Global, this podcast, have access to speaking opportunities, have access to all the insights, uh, and our network, feel free to drop us a line and we'll get you sorted. With this said, let's jump and introduce
So,
Dara.
Yuri, I'm having a little audio problem here. Maybe you could carry on with introduction of Dara, and I'll dial out and see if that fixes my issue.
Sure. Thank you, Clyde. So while Clyde is figuring out the tech setup, Dara, please, stage is yours. Give us a neat introduction and a few words about farm types.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Yuri and Clyde. My name is Dara Adekunle and founder of Farmties Capital Limited. We're basically a company that supports trade and investment between Africa and the global markets. And this is based out of the opportunity we've seen and our own lived experiences where access to capital and access to markets have hindered a lot of African ag SMEs from participating in global and international trade. And so we do this with, our teams on the ground. Myself, I enjoy what I do. Happy always, visiting factories, speaking to entrepreneurs, and also, working around innovative solutions that would solve their capital requirements or needs.
Great. Okay, so I think I'm back. So
You are. Can you hear us?
yes, I can. That's great. So I mean, obviously you've had an interesting journey in this. So what have you learned so far from your experience in moving from, ag tech to actually trade finance?
Yeah, good question. I think I like to tell a story of how I got into agriculture. So I'm an engineer by training, so it means that I did a lot of practical stuff, specifically electrical and electronics engineering. So I did a lot around programming, did a lot around computer networking, and for me, what have always caught my interest were rural revitalization, renewable energy, and all of that interesting stuff. And I got into agriculture from the classroom. I like to tell that story because I left school to start up a farm, and the farm was a moringa farm specifically to produce bio oil and biogas. But interestingly, it turned out to be something else because I was born and I grew up in northern Nigeria, and moringa is a source of food and a very healthy food if you know if you follow the trends as well. And so I started growing moringa, processing moringa into powder, packaging the seeds for the market, and a lot of people from the southern part of Nigeria began to reach out to me to say, "Hey, Dara, I know you sell moringa, but then you are in the north. There is maize, there's soya bean, there are other products. We need those supplies, And it really got me thinking. And because of my work engaging rural communities, I just did in my own research where I engaged directly with smallholder farmers, and I saw the constraints around access to markets for them. So it's almost like the demand is far from supply, and supply is focused on production, and then the whole infrastructure in the middle is quite difficult to pull, and that's where the idea of Farmties came about, and we set up that mission to provide access to markets for smallholder farmers and access to the right information, and that evolved us into thinking like a tech people as we are. All my co-founders are engineers, and so one of us decided to pick up his skills and registered farmties.com. The reason why we have the name farmties.com is because we could get a .com and we could use it to set up the platform. And so we set up this tech platform, and the idea was around more like a marketplace, and it evolved from a marketplace to also allowing like investments to happen through that marketplace. But then there was a whole lot of work behind the scene, and a lot of work means you are actually practically or traditionally engaging farmers, going to the field, calling, and verifying a lot of things that you show up on your platform, because you don't want to have inaccurate information, and that's a lot to deal with. And by the time you look at the cost of managing the platform and the cost of empowering the farmers with the tools, and we're talking about mobile phones, data, access to electricity, which is not really within your control, you find out it's a little bit difficult, supporting these farmers as you like to leverage in tech. And as much as we, try to keep up, our tech, platform, I'll say it helped us with obviously managing our operations and seeing all our inventory. But then it's a lot of work behind the scenes. And I know we don't talk about that a lot, but that's where the real agriculture is not on the platform. And that's how we've evolved. From that experience, we noticed that so many farmers or even aggregators like us, because we took on that role of an aggregator, and aggregator like us, all we had was our platform, the access to farmers, access to market, and no capital. And we remember speaking to an experienced exporter, and he told us, "Hey guys, you need a lot of money, and I'm not going to lie to you. Like, you need a lot of money, and you should figure out how to get it." And at that point, we're very young, early 20s, and we go to the bank. It's almost like, right, these people, it was just like an interesting experience. You go to the bank and they're like, "What do you have? Do you have collateral? Do you have this?" You don't have all of that. But then you have the farmers, and then you have a buyer, and you have the skill and the zeal to make things happen, but you don't have the capital. And so we had to, raise funding from alternative sources, which is usually like obviously family and friends and people that were able to convince to invest into some of those transactions. And we realized that that's not only our problem. A lot of people working in the space, and we're talking about aggregators, we're talking about food processors, have that challenge with access to capital. And that's how we evolved, from tech company to actual practitioners, to farmers, tech company, actual practitioners, and now we're more like working on a solution which is a fund that would allow more working capital into African ag exports, supporting African SMEs.
Yeah, well, and just I'll throw this in here that as you've raised African food and agri-food exports to Canada, Dara and I will be on a podcast on March 31st regarding a Canada-Africa agriculture trade summit that's coming up in Saskatoon in June. So I'm looking forward to that. Actually, I think that's July, is it not, in Saskatoon? But if you want to catch that, look at our either one of our LinkedIn feeds, and you'll see information about that pod or about the webinar on March 31st. Because agri-food trade between Canada and Africa, it could be a lot stronger than it is right now. So Yuri, maybe you want to hop in and comment about those issues. I mean, you deal with people in the ag tech space, but they all face, I think, a similar issue as entrepreneurs in raising capital.
For sure, for sure. Well, for startup founders, entrepreneurs, raising capital is one of the biggest challenges, and it's no different for different parts of the world. But I just wanted to comment on what Dara mentioned about how access to finances and access to capital is one of the biggest challenges in agri-food or in general. And we've been working with companies out of Africa as well, and we've been kind of involved in AgTech innovations in Africa, and we saw that a lot of solutions or digital platforms for AgTech in Africa is focused on three main things: access to knowledge, access to inputs, and access to financing. And I think access to financing, access to money, either to do international trade or support your local operations or your local farm, is one of the biggest challenges. And my personal opinion that African AgTech is doing the best job in what I call personally agri-fintech solution. So how do you combine agriculture and finance in one? And I've seen some very great, very innovative approaches in that field, and I think initiative and enterprises like Farmties, it's a good example where you have idea as an agtech company, but then you evolve into something bigger, because not every innovation, and I know it's gonna sound controversial from my side because we are building digital tools, but sometimes innovations not about digital product, website, mobile app, or something else. It's about accessible way to get something you need, finance, for example.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, the I guess I'd be interested, Dara, in when you're, talking to entrepreneurs, to agribusinesses in this space. What do you find are some of the challenges they're facing, in addition to raising capital?
Yeah, I think most of the, especially African, agriculture, you find a lot of entrepreneurs doing everything. And it's not
Mhm.
like that's the intention. It's just that the way things are done forces you to be everything. So you're your power provider, you're the infrastructure provider, you're the farmer, you're the trader, you're the aggregator, you're the exporter. You're doing everything, and it doesn't always set out to be that. Especially for those who more like started up as agtech providers who were trying to raise capital from traditional VC, and then the ambition to allow the technology work for several smallholder farmers more like made them to go maybe like some sort of skill that may affected their business in some sort of way, or maybe stalled them in a way. And so it's almost like they're solving all the problems in the value chain. And in an ideal scenario, they should just focus on their specialty, and that may just be the technology, or that may be farming, or that may just be financing. But you see that everything is combined from an African for an African entrepreneur. And so for many entrepreneurs, if you look maybe fast 10 years ago, there were so many agtech companies. If you look now, it seems like they've evolved, or some of them are no longer existing because of the challenges that they've had to deal with by themselves. And so I'd say the entrepreneurs that are able to survive are those that are being practical, practical about the realities of what they're facing, and also practical about what the industry is. I always say, in my opinion, that agtech is not one of those unicorn enterprises. It is the camels and the donkeys that steadily would give you your returns, but you may not be 10x anytime. So if you're able to be realistic about the value chain and how you work, it kind of makes you then solve sustainably and solve for the long term. it's a long-term investment from how I see it. But those are some of the challenges I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs take on, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I think in summary, you're sort of saying specialization is really important, because if you try and take too broad a mandate, you're going to, struggle in getting a proper business plan together and that. I mean, do you see that, Yuri, where people are having a hard time specializing, or do you find some of your clients are over specialized, that they're too narrow in their scope?
Well, that's a very good question. And generally speaking, every startup, every new venture should start from small to big. So you're trying
Hmm.
with, you're starting with very niche use case, and then when you have the success you need, the 10x you were looking for in your niche, then you scale based on that to new regions, new crop, new services, yada yada yada. But the general rule of thumb is start small and grow big, and I think it applies everywhere. The other thing that what I've seen in a lot of agtech companies, they're trying to become everything at once. So they are a marketplace, they are a financial tool, they are educational tool, and it's hard to keep this amount of expertise within one company and be compatible, competitive. Sorry, and being able to provide the service or a product in on a level that your users or your customers expect. So I guess we need to specialize, but in some cases we just go full throttle all in and trying to do best of it. But I mean, it is what it is. That's a part of a game.
Right. So maybe just moving slightly to a more broad question, Dara. I think there's a lot of talk about the need for food security in Africa, and yet you're supporting exports of food from Africa.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe some of our viewers and listeners might find that hard to square that circle. So maybe you could talk a little about why you think Africa exporting food makes so much sense for the countries like Nigeria and in East Africa.
Yeah, I do think it's very important. And if you follow the economies of those countries, you'll see that I call them resilient economies. They've gone through a lot of tough times. And
Mhm.
if you realize a country needs to promote export to be able to increase, their GDP and increase the overall, economy of the country. And one thing we find is that Africa has a lot of comparative advantages for a couple of export crops that we don't necessarily eat as much, and so they go to waste if they are not processed and exported, and that's the reality that we see. And so something that we try to encourage a lot is that the value addition on the continent, which is an opportunity, and that those value added products are exported from the continent. In terms of food security, I could speak from Nigeria. We import a lot of food that we can produce, which is almost like an irony to why we should be doing what we're doing, considering that Africa has, arable land, Nigeria has fertile soil, and we should grow what we eat. But then there are a lot of a lot of structural challenges as well as access to finance that always comes up that hinders, that level of productivity that you'd like to see. And so you find that many businesses, even just operating just locally, more like, struggle for the longest time. And when they add maybe like an export component to what they're doing, then they're able to balance their income. Because at the end of the day, it's about building a sustainable business. And exporting doesn't have to be like out to Europe or to Asia or North America. It could even just be to neighboring African countries, and where we can maximize the return on investment. So for us, the reason why we are focused on export is also we understand, the cost of capital, the capital that is like always more like available, but even beyond that is that we have comparative advantages, and if we're not able to, add value and export those products that the whole world needs, then those products will just go to waste on the continent, and that's what we've seen, and that's why we prioritize, export from the continent. And beyond that, we also we're prioritizing export because we see it as innovation and we see it as African expansion. So where an African company expands to Canada, expands to the US to set up maybe a manufacturing facility or a co-packing facility, that's the kind of like success story that we want to see, because if we can see products from other parts of the world even getting to, Africa, then why can't we have Africa products also all over the world? And it's just that capacity that we need to build. So we also see it as exporting Africa innovation, exporting African businesses to the world, and we think that that's a very good investment, and that's how we look at things.
Yeah. Yeah. Yuri, do you want to pipe in on that theme as well?
Sure, Sin. A small comment from me: in order to be successful in the global community, you need to have export activities, and food security is a huge topic, not only in Africa but throughout the globe. But having export capabilities, being able to sell internationally, it's, as Dara mentioned, one of the biggest drivers of GDP of any country. And even if you import a lot of stuff, you still need to sell what you're good at. And I think creating those opportunities for smallholder farmers, for aggregators, for contract farming companies, outgrowers, or usually called outgrowers, it's a very big aspect of success of agri-food in Africa, but also AgTech as a part of agri-food. So hands down, it's good to sell internationally.
Yeah, it's I mean, obviously, from my Canadian perspective, Canada's a major food and agricultural products exporter, and it's been a big part of, well, a huge part of the success of Canadian agriculture. So, maybe, Dara, when you're looking to finance projects and companies in the agri-food supply chain, um, what do you obviously have to do a lot of due diligence, I'm guessing. And so what is it you're looking for as the hallmarks of a good investment, and to minimize your risk factors?
Yeah, that's a very important question. The quality of the business is as important as the quality of our business. And so we want to see a business that has a big vision. And big vision means you're taking a lot of responsibility in putting your house in order. And that is your books, record keeping are up to date. You have your audited accounts, your business is registered, you have your appropriate licenses. And most importantly, because we're focused on export, we also want to see that you have a quality, trade relationship. And that means the buyer should be a credible buyer of your product. And you as well should be credible enough to fulfill the demand of that product. And those are the things we look out for. It's almost like the same way a banker will look at you to see if you're bankable or investment ready. That is the same lens at which we would look at you. And in addition to that, we also look at your trade readiness and your trade effectiveness as well. Because at the end of the day, our success to us is beyond you just taking your product out of the country. Success to us is that you are able to grow a business over time on the continent that is sustainable, maybe for the next 50, 60 years, that would even outlive you and pass on to the next generation. And so we want to see that entrepreneur that is ready to invest in the community, invest in smallholder farmers, and invest in the processing activities that they are doing for the long term. And that's why for us as Farmties, we really prioritize value addition. I say that a lot, and that's because what we have seen is that from the farm to the market, 30 to 50% of the food produce is wasted, and is wasted because of aggregation support, lack of food processing. And so for entrepreneurs who would take that risk to either raise investment or go into manufacturing, we see them as people who are very serious in what they are doing, who have a very long-term vision in what they are doing, and we'll start from there. And the next question for us is, okay, you may be aggregating now, you already started processing, but what's the growth plan? What's the growth plan to have your products, maybe on the shelves of Walmart or even, at the shelves of global store. Because when those opportunities come knocking, they would not just be for businesses that are not ready. They will be for businesses that can, stand the test of time and meet those kind of demand. And so for us, we need to see an entrepreneur that is ready to play on a global stage. And we do all this analysis, like I mentioned, by, looking at the business, seeing what they have. We will not judge you if you don't have everything, but at least we do have like some technical support that we could, provide some advice to you to say, this is how you can get things better. If, for example, if you want to get into the Canadian market, we can, put you through experts that can help you with, compliance around CFIA and to get your products into the to market. So I'd say that's basically how we would work. And we're also very big on referrals. So many of the businesses that come to us are through, strong, entrepreneurial networks. And so it's almost like they're pre-vetted. It's not just, somebody dreaming a big dream and they're not ready to work. Like, these are people that have made the effort to do something, have joined networks, and we get some businesses referred to us by, like, very, very strong network within Africa.
Yeah, you're often working with entrepreneurs in more the digital side of things. What do you see as the hallmarks of success in the companies that you deal with?
Just before I'm gonna answer this question, I'm gonna show one comment that we have
Oh,
from
okay,
our
I've missed
viewers
that. All right.
on LinkedIn, and it's not that of a question, but a comment. But I think it's very relevant. Product traceability is also very critical, and I think one of the
Hmm.
three pillars of digital solutions that supports international trade, and kind of it links back to our previous guest and previous discussion. It's first of all operational management, so ability to have commodity trading and risk management systems in place to
Hmm.
streamline your operations. The second biggest uh, driver or driver/challenge for international trade is compliance and certifications. So being compliant with different standards when you want to sell to Europe, it's always a big question how you do that. And digital tools that allows you to have this traceability, to have this origination management in place, and understand where the crops or where the goods come from. And also the last one is logistic modules. So being able to streamline your logistics operations from a farm to port to end
Hmm.
location of your crops. These three things, specifically to our topic today, international trade, are in my experience are the most needed in terms of digital innovations.
Yeah. And obviously import markets are obviously looking for not just uh, reductions in food waste, but they are also looking for high quality products. And I think all these technologies, including warehousing, cold chain, if you're dealing with refrigerated or frozen products, canning, all those things are really, an important part of the puzzle. But I think too, though, Dara, maybe comment on this, but I think that even though being able to meet, imports standards and controls in foreign markets, that's tough. But at the same time, companies that can achieve that level of compliance, it must give them a significant competitive advantage.
Yeah, that's right. It definitely does. And it's almost like, how do you play in international trade if you're not compliant? It's like the biggest, it's the biggest requirement in international trade. And for companies, it's an investment, but it's an investment that, would increase, your access, your market access, but also even increase your income if you're able to do that. And one thing that we've been doing so far is we've done a lot around even capacity building. Part of what we do is because we realize that even if financing is available, if you're not, if you don't meet the requirements, then financing cannot move, right? And so we've had to, engage even experts in the US and Canada and EU who understand getting the products into the market and meeting regulatory compliance, because at the end of the day, you're trying to manage and reduce risk. And if you follow the EUDR regulations, you see that like the comments, traceability is now key. People want to buy coffee and almost see the picture of the farmer if possible, but also like know the exact location it's coming from. And these things are very important because we're talking about food safety. We're talking about also global food security, and people need to care about these things. And for companies that can take the pain to make that investment, it just attracts better opportunities for them and allows them to play in the global space just like any other person.
Yeah, premium products, I mean, we have Easter coming up in Canada, North America, Europe, I think as well. And obviously, right now, there's the price of chocolate, and obviously cacao and cocoa are, very high. But that's obviously an opportunity for people that can produce those products. The same thing with other premium products like tropical fruits and things like that, and nuts, and a lot of things that Africa can produce. So, in terms of innovation, and I know one of your pillars that you deal with is, technology transfer. It's one of the areas that you want to finance, if I'm right on that. And so, what are the kinds of tech and digital innovations that you think are the most important for supporting, entrepreneurs in the agricultural export area?
Yeah, what I've seen, and I'm obviously I'll say maybe like a techie that is always a techie, right? What we have seen are some very interesting innovations that are very tied to, commodities or products. And so we've seen, I like to call them trade techs. I've seen trade tech companies that, support invoice discounting, factoring, and supporting exporters with access to finance to meet international buyer requirements. I've seen a lot of technologies around traceability. I've also seen a lot of I would say trade operating systems. And I know maybe that's the future. I do hope. I know that some maybe Exim banks are implementing such systems, but just seeing African AgTech companies coming with those kind of solutions that could also help exporters to manage inventory, manage stock, manage traceability, manage compliance and certification, and even track. I saw a platform that integrated even tracking the logistics of the product to the final destination. That is amazing. And so for me, those are technologies that we like to promote, and we like to promote them not necessarily because they're tech OS, but because of the underlying activity that they are doing. It means they're supporting actual SMEs, actual farmers, actual producers, using their platform to provide them, that support, but beyond the support, access to market, access to, traceability system, even also access to capital. And so those are some things that we promote because we know that those platforms also require, like Yuri said earlier, they also require lots of financing to get them going as well.
Right. Well, Yuri, one thing I think is interesting these days, there are so many digital solutions and apps that are available to people, but how many apps can one company support? I mean, what is that fine line between finding the perfect solution for your digital problem, but then not ending up with 30 different kinds of apps that you're using in your business?
Well, that's an interesting question. Inevitably, the more digitized you become, and the more different tools you use. But if you need to generalize, for traders, one of the biggest challenge is to see their inventory, to see their logistics and warehousing possibilities. That's why commodity trading risk management systems are in play there. A lot of for farm level data, farm management systems that helps you to track your fields, your operations, your crops, your seasons, all of that. There is no one unique tool that will cover the whole supply chain or value chain, because each part of the agri-food value chain is very different. It needs very different types of innovations, and cannot be combined in one tool. But there are tools that trying to do that. I don't want to do a name dropping or promotion, but one of our speakers, CEO of Zovacell, that's a Nigerian startup, that they built a very good system that actually have a lot of different modules: farm management, marketplace, certifications. So that's a good example of how you combine a lot of different use cases in one digital place without having 30 or 20 or 15 different apps that you need to use on day to day. So yeah, that's tough, but you need to find this solutions that can be, once again, specialized enough but generic enough to be used within your company.
Yeah. What gaps do you see in the available technology that would be important for your client base that maybe don't exist or maybe need to be better than they are now? Or I mean, are there any needs that aren't being met? Dara,
Well,
oh, go ahead, Yuri. Sorry.
no, I just a quick comment that there are a lot of different technologies available for very specific use cases, for very generic use cases. The problem with technologies in general is how adaptable they are, how many users you have, and how monetizable it is. And that's the biggest challenge that for a lot of cases in agri-food is not resolved. Having technologies is not enough. Monetizing it and actually generating some value for the end
Yeah.
users, that's the question.
Yeah. Dara, you want to comment on that too?
Yeah, sure. I think generally the gaps is on adoption, right? And Africa, for example, is a largely informal economy. So even when we talk about ag fintech, the reality is that you're taking a lot of cash to go buy commodities, even on the field, right? And so if sometimes you build those technologies and adoption is the challenge, and sometimes it's just access to, infrastructure to allow technology adoption happen. And if you look at even digital extension as a service, you find out that there are key people within the community who will do whatever it takes to ensure that they're connected. You empower them with the device, but having all farmers maybe have a smartphone may not be entirely practical. And so when I look at ag technologies and good example with what Yuri mentioned, you realize that it works for the business, it works for the implementer. And because it works, they can make it work for the main people that can enable them to reach, the farmers, for example. And so one thing I like to see is that it's almost everyone has to build their own technology. Like even if it doesn't scale, at least they get to use it, and they get to use it to strengthen their operations. And also, like Yuri mentioned, technologies differ across all the value chain. Sometimes it may just be the hard technology that is required, like solar dryers, irrigation, all those kind of like technologies, or maybe also food processing technologies that enable like food processing efficiency within the chain. So it's almost like different needs at different points, but AgTech solutions or entrepreneurs who are filling this gap, it's like they're building a purpose-built technology and they're making it work for them. And that's the thing, because I always say this, the competition is not using technology. And so if you're using technology, it's like, what makes you better? In the African setting, your competition is not using technology. And that competition is the commodity trader that is sitting in the local market that's been trading for the past 50 years. He just uses his mobile phone and calls and does all his business. And so if you're adding that level to it, it means that you should reduce waste, you should be more efficient, and you should be more profitable, because technology is a cost to you. And so that's what I'm saying. It's like that wide adoption, but for those who are leveraging it, it works for them and it makes them efficient. And it's an enabler of their business. So they can do things faster.
Yeah, I think people underestimate the importance of efficiency in sustainability, and so I mean, I love the word efficiency. Yuri, do you want to comment as well on that? I'm getting a little background here.
Yeah, there is a bit of background noise, but Dara is absolutely correct. Technology costs money, and in order to adopt them, they need to create some sort of profit or value for the company. And showing this value or profit for your user, whether it's a trader, whether it's a farm operator, whether it's a co-ops or whoever it is in agri-food value chain, that the important part that a lot of startups in agtechs are struggling with. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't embrace it. We should. We just need to have a clear way on how to show this value to the end users.
Yeah. Well, I think Africa is a very interesting place because being the youngest continent on the planet, it's the number of young people there is very high proportionally compared to most of the rest of the world. So it's an economy driven by younger people who are more open to technology, and I think Africa has also leapfrogged some of the old technologies that is hard for people in, let's say, Europe and North America to get rid of. I mean, we've got so much copper strung all over the place and microwave towers and stuff like that that Africa doesn't have, but it's leapfrogging to more wireless technology and other solutions. So I think it's well positioned to take advantage of, digital agriculture. So I guess we're coming to the end of our time. We did ask Dara to prepare a bit of her thoughts on a hot take, something that would be important for our audience to know, about this topic. And maybe we could ask you to lay that out for us. Now, Yuri and I are excited to hear what you have to say.
Interesting. I just wish you can imagine this. But I'll say my hot take is that the future of Africa, agriculture will be actually Africans playing in the space. So what I see is that the big, multinational commodity, players will be more like replaced by Africans. I hope. I know that's a big take, but the reason is because I think that a lot of youths and a lot of African players are beginning to see the importance of taking that responsibility in the African ag ecosystem. And I know most of the time it's always like they're in competition, but if you follow the trends, you will see that there's almost like a transfer of, like, I'll say, power of some sorts from multinationals, international multinationals, to Africans to more like take on the responsibility in African export, African food production. And so it's almost like we're seeing a leapfrog moment happening in trade, which happened in mobile money, right? And so we're seeing that the infrastructure is being built. I know it's slower than we expect, but we do see that some successful examples of exchanges or that are working in Africa, or very innovative solutions around agricultural warehouse receipt systems, access to financing. I think they can be skilled and they can be all integrated in that future, where we don't have to look at trade platform as a separate from financing platform. They'll all be integrated together, and that's because African innovation is taking its role and taking its place, and that's what I see. I know it's a very big vision, but I think it's already happening. Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, I've really enjoyed the conversation today. I think you've raised a lot of interesting points, and I think you have a very interesting business model. So thanks very much for joining us, Dara. As always, at the end we turn the microphone over to Yuri for a few closing comments.
Yes, thank you, Clyde. Dara, thank you as well. Great discussion. Very, very fresh view on international trade and how it can be supported. Guys, stick around for the next episode in April. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. It was brought to you by Cultivate, AgTech social development company. We'll be in touch in April, and I hope you enjoy our content. With this said, thank you, Clyde. Thank you, Dara. It was a great conversation.
Yeah. See you on March 31st, Dara.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you. Bye.
Bye.